All right. I'm starting the Dragonlance Chronicles, primarily for you, Yara. Here's a picture of the cover of the book. Yes, it's super old. In fact, it's so old, I've got an inscription right in the front here that says, To Matt, love mom and dad, 1995 or 1295. And I've had it since then. And I loved it as a kid, and maybe you'll love it too. Here's a picture of the continent of Ancelot. I'm trying to be very careful with this thing because, like I said, it's old, and I feel like if I mistreat it, it will definitely fall apart. Kaios will probably appreciate that now. Okay. And we'll start with Volume 1, Dragons of Autumn Twilight. The Canticle of the Dragon. Hear the sage as his song descends like a heaven's rain or tears, and washes the years, the dust of the many stories, from the high tail of the Dragonlance. For in ages deep, past memory and word, in the first blush of the world when the 3 moons rose from the lap of the forest, dragons, terrible and great, made war on this world of Kryn. Yet out of the darkness of dragons, out for cries of light, in the blank face of the black moon soaring, a banked light flared in Solamnia, a knight of truth and of power, who called down the gods themselves and forged the mighty Dragonlance, piercing the soul of dragonkind, driving the shade of their wings from the brightening shores of Kryn. Thus Huma, knight of Solamnia, Lightbringer, first Lancer, followed his light to the foot of the Kalkist mountains, to the stone feet of the gods, to the crouched silence of their temple. He called down the lance makers. He took on their unspeakable power to crush the unspeakable evil, to thrust the coiling darkness back down the tunnel of the dragon's throat. Paldine, the great god of good, shone at the side of Huma, strengthening the lance of his right arm, and Huma, ablaze in 1,000 moons, banished the queen of darkness, banished the swarm of her shrieking hosts, back to the senseless kingdom of death, where their curses swooped upon nothing and nothing deep below the brightening land. Thus ended in thunder the age of dreams, and began the age of might, when Istar, kingdom of light and truth, arose in the east, where minarets of white and gold spired to the sun and to the sun's glory, announcing the passing of evil. And Istar, who mothered and cradled the long summers of good, shone like a meteor in the white skies of the just. Yet in the fullest of sunlight, the king priest of Ishtar saw shadows. At night, he saw the trees of things with daggers, the streams blackened and thickened under the silent moon. He searched books for the paths of Huma, for scrolls, signs, and spells, so that he too might summon the gods, might find their aid in his holy aims, might purge the world of sin. Then came the time of dark and death. As the gods turned from the world, a mountain of fire crashed like a comet through Ishtar. The city split like a skull in the flames. Mountains burst from once fertile valleys. Seas poured into the graves of mountains. The desert sighed on abandoned floors of the seas. The highways of Kryn erupted and became the paths of the dead. Thus began the age of despair. The roads were tangled. The winds and the sandstorms dwelt in the husks of cities. The plains and mountains became our home. As the old gods lost their power, we called to the blank sky, and to the cold, dividing gray to the ears of the new gods. The sky is calm, silent, unmoving. We have yet to hear their answer. The old man. Tika Whalen strengthened... I'm not editing this, so you get what you get. Tika Whalen straightened her back with a sigh, flexing her shoulders to ease her cramped muscles. She tossed the soapy bar rag into the water pail and glanced around the empty room. It was getting harder to keep up the old inn. There was a lot of love rubbed into the warm finish of the wood, but even love and tallow couldn't hide cracks and splits in the well-used tables or prevent a customer from sitting on an occasional splinter. The Inn of the Last Home was not fancy, not like some she'd heard about in Haven. It was comfortable. The living tree in which it was built wrapped its ancient arms around it lovingly, while the walls and fixtures were crafted around the boughs of the tree with such care as to make it impossible to tell where nature's work left off and man's began. The bar seemed to ebb and flow like a polished wave around the living wood that supported it. The stained glass in the window panes cast welcoming flashes of vibrant color across the room. Shadows were dwindling as noon approached. The Inn of the Last Home would soon be open for business. Tika looked around and smiled in satisfaction. The tables were clean and polished. All she had left to do was sweep the floor. She began to shove aside the heavy wooden benches as Otik emerged from the kitchen, enveloped in a fragrant stream. "Should be another brisk day, for both the weather and business," he said, squeezing his stout body behind the bar. He began to set out mugs, whistling cheerfully. "I like the business cooler and the weather warmer," said Tika, tugging at a bench. "I walked my feet off yesterday and got little thanks and less tips. Such a gloomy crowd. Everybody nervous, jumping at every sound. I dropped a mug last night, and I swear Ritark drew his sword." "Pah!" Otik snorted. "Ritark's a solace seeker guard. They're always nervous. You would be too if you had to work for Hedrick, that fanat." "Watch it," Tika warned. Otik shrugged. "Unless the high theocrat can fly now, he won't be listening to us. I'd hear his boots on the stairs before he could hear me." But Tika noticed he lowered his voice as he continued. "The residents of Solace won't put up with much more, mark my words. People disappearing, being dragged off to who knows where. It's a sad time." He shook his head. Then he brightened. "But it's good for business. Until he until he closes us down," Tika said gloomily. She grabbed the broom and began sweeping briskly. "Even theocrats need to fill their bellies and wash the fire and brimstone from their throats." Odik chuckled. "It must be thirsty work, haranguing people about the new gods day in and out. He's in here every night." Tika stopped her sweeping and leaned against the bar. "Odik," she said seriously, her voice subdued, "there's other talk, too. Talk of war. Armies massing in the north. And there are these strange hooded men in town, hanging around with the high theocrat, asking questions." Odik looked at the 19-year-old girl fondly, reached out and patted her cheek. He'd been a father to her ever since her own had vanished so mysteriously. He tweaked her red curls. "War," he sniffed. "There's been talk of war ever since the Cataclysm. It's just talk, girl. Maybe the theocrat makes it up just to keep people in line." "I don't know," Tika frowned. The door opened. Both Tika and Odik started in alarm and turned to the door. They had not heard footsteps on the stairs, and that was uncanny. The Inn of the Last Home was built high on the branches of a mighty valenwood tree, as was every other building in Solace, with the exception of the blacksmith shop. The town people had decided to take to the trees during the terror and chaos following the Cataclysm, and thus Solace became a tree town, one of the few truly beautiful wonders left on Krynn. Sturdy wooden bridge walks connected the houses and businesses perched high above the ground, where 500 people went about their daily lives. The Inn of the Last Home was the largest building in Solace and stood 40 feet off the ground. Stairs ran around the ancient valenwood's gnarled trunk. As Odik had said, any visitor to the inn would be heard approaching long before he was seen. But neither Tika nor Odik had heard the old man. He stood in the doorway, leaning on a worn oak staff, and peered around the inn. The tattered hood of his plain gray robe was drawn over his head, its shadow obscuring the features of his face, except for his hawkish, shining eyes. "Can I help you, old one?" Tika asked the stranger, exchanging worried glances with Odik. Was this old man a seeker spy? The old man blinked. "You open?" "Well," Tika hesitated. "Certainly," Odik said, smiling broadly. "Come in, Greybeard. Tika, find our guest a chair. He must be tired after that long climb." Climb? Scratching his head, the old man glanced around the porch, then looked down to the ground below. Oh, yes, climb. A great many stairs. He hobbled inside, then made a playful swipe at Tika with his staff. Get along with your work, girl. I'm capable of finding my own share. Tika shrugged, reached for her broom and began sweeping, keeping her eyes on the old man. He stood in the center of the inn, peering around as though confirming the location and position of each table and chair in the room. The common room was large and bean-shaped, wrapped around the trunk of the vallenwood. The tree's smaller limbs supported the floor and ceiling. He looked with particular interest at the fireplace, which stood about 3/4 of the way back into the room. The only stonework in the inn, it was obviously crafted by dwarven hands, to appear to be part of the tree, winding naturally through the branches above. A bin next to the side of the fire pit was stacked high with cordwood and pine logs brought down from the high mountains. No resident of Solace would consider burning wood of their own great trees. There was a back route out of the kitchen. It was a 40-foot drop, but a few of Odic's customers found this setup very convenient. So did the old man. He muttered satisfied comments to himself as his eyes went from one area to another. Then, to Tika's astonishment, he suddenly dropped his staff, hitched up his sleeves of his robes, and began rearranging furniture. Tika stopped sweeping and leaned on her broom. What are you doing? That table's always been there. A long, narrow table stood in the center of the common room. The old man dragged it across the floor and shoved it up against the trunk of the huge vallenwood, right across from the fire pit, then stepped back to admire his work. There, he grunted. Supposed to be closer to the fire pit. Now bring over 2 more chairs. Need 6 round here. Tika turned to Odic. He seemed about to protest, but at that moment there was a flaring light from the kitchen. A scream from the cook indicated that grease had caught fire again. Odic hurried toward the swinging kitchen doors. He's harmless. Oh, I'm sorry. This is Odic talking. He's harmless, he puffed as he passed Tika. Let him do what he wants, within reason. Maybe he's throwing a party. Tika sighed and took 2 chairs over to the old man as requested. She set them down where he indicated. Now, the old man said, glancing around sharply, bring 2 more chairs, comfortable ones, mind you, over here. Put them next to the fire pit, in that shadowy corner. 'Tisn't shadowy, Tika protested. It's sitting in full sunlight. Ah, the old man's eyes narrowed. But it will be shadowy tonight, won't it, when the fire's lit? I suppose so, Tika faltered. Bring the chairs, that's a good girl, and I want one right here. The old man gestured at the spot in front of the fire pit. For me. Are you giving a party, old one? Tika asked as she carried over the most comfortable, well-worn chair in the inn. A party? The thought seemed to strike the old man as funny. He chuckled. Yes, girl. It will be a party such as the world of Kryn has not since seen before the cataclysm. Be ready, Tika Whalen. Be ready. He patted her shoulder, tousled her hair, then turned and lowered himself, bones creaking, into the chair. A mug of ale, he ordered. Tika went to pour the ale. It wasn't until she had brought the old man his drink and gone back to her sweeping that she stopped, wondering how he knew her name. And there we go.